Here we are. Let's do this. Much later than normal. And the world is unaffected. The only thing that's affected is my mental state. Okay.
Be affected all day long.
No, it won't. I'm actually getting better at that. I'm trying to pay more attention to stress. Like in the moment, like that right there. You can feel it. And I've learned to like go look at my heart rate and I'll go, yeah, your heart rate's 102 right now. You're just sitting in a car. What's going on? It's all up here, you know. All right, we are talking our way through some history in order to figure out how we got to the world that exists today and Christianity and the Christians' place in it. I think I said last week, if you were born in 2010, then this world that we see full of identity politics and everything is the only world you've ever known, which can make it seem extremely natural. Kind of like a dysfunctional home, right? I mean, if your home life is really dysfunctional, that's all you've ever known. And so if you meet normality, you go into a friend's house or something and it's normal, then normal can seem strange. And so, wrong, not right. And you can actually end up seeking out the abnormality. A lot of people do that. They can't take normal. I have a friend who had a foster kid who very dysfunctional, and she couldn't take it. They adopted, and then she couldn't take it, and she ended up exiting when she turned 18 and headed back to become exactly what her mother is. And now there's all of that. And so she'll pass that down to her next generation, which is 3 kids right now. Anyway, we've been making our way through this timeline, and we've talked through basically on the timeline since the birth of Jesus and Christianity's interaction with culture. In this case, it would be starting with the Hellenistic Roman culture of Jesus' day, and then proceeding through the changes down through the centuries. And so we've talked about this period of time, which is sometimes called medieval period. A part of it is called the Dark Ages. It is often called the pre-modern era, which is self-flattering, of course, to those of us that think of ourselves as modern, because modern has a naturally virtuous connotation to it, right? If you're modern, nobody thinks of the fact that modern might be bad, right? They think of pre-modern as bad and modern as good. Well, modern is not an unmitigated good, as we'll find out shortly. But we just finished talking about this medieval period, which saw the rise of the power of the Bishop of Rome and sort of his institutionalized superiority, his institutionalized I don't know what you want to call it. Let's go superiority over the other bishops, other church bishops in the Roman Empire, because that's the area. Western civilization is a hand-me-down of the Greco-Roman world, essentially. And so we have then during this period this fusion of church and state that is often called Christendom. And that will be a major factor in what's coming up with the Protestant Reformation. And even today, when you hear that idea of the church and the state being fused together so that you have a Christian culture, Christendom, and even in modern ears, it sounds strange, especially in American ears, it sounds strange, because the birth of the United States was precisely a reaction against that, which is why, if you look up the First Amendment, it is stated the way that it is about establishment of a religion, which we'll go back and look at probably shortly. But anyway, we talked through the Black Plague and its effect on the culture and society and the state and landowners and land laborers and renters and so forth, and how all of that went out the window, serfdom, and is in wholesale flux now, as it's some kind of chaos that's got to reorganize along different lines. And that's the state of culture. And the church has to find its place in that, its role in that. And so what we're going to see over the next few centuries is a denigration of church authority. And part of the reason, I think, is because the church was of no help, offered no protection against the effects of the plague. And so it's, we do all this stuff, this religious stuff. The church has all this authority. The monastics are over there, the monks are over there doing their thing, and none of it did any good. And we're under the curse of God. That's the way a lot of them thought of it. We're under the curse of God, and the church is no help whatsoever. And just that alone will result in some kind of a discrediting, a discrediting effect on church authority. But now we're going to launch into, we've already talked about it, but we're into the period known as the Renaissance. So it's really ironic that a period characterized by the name the Black Plague will be followed up immediately and not coincidentally by a period called the Renaissance, which is also probably self-flattering. But anyway, what happened was these forces were unleashed in which there was the wholesale resurgence of, there was a wholesale sense of change in culture, not just politics, not politics necessarily, but culture. And so you have the rise of these personalities that we talked about a little bit, Michelangelo, art, architecture, all of it. And as far as the church is concerned, probably the biggest one that we want to talk about is John Wycliffe, who there's a lot to say about him, but the one that I want to highlight, and maybe his most enduring accomplishment, was the translation one of the I don't know, rallying cries, if you will, of the Renaissance was back to the sources. Well, back to the sources meant bypassing 1,000 years of Latin tradition to get back to the originals. And so it's back to the sources, back to the originals. Well, in the case of the Bible, the originals were Greek. And so Wycliffe translated the Latin Vulgate, which we've already talked about, which had reigned for 1,000 years, almost exactly, into English. So he was the first one to put an English Bible into the hands of English-speaking Europeans. And you wouldn't think that such a thing would be controversial at all, but it was tremendously controversial and provocative, and to some seditious, and a direct assault on church authority, and therefore Christendom in general. All of that. That was the effect of John Wycliffe. And on a simple act, well, it didn't even have to be anything he said, just the simple act of translating a Bible into English, even from the Latin. That's the kind of sway that the Latin Bible had on not just the church, but on European civilization, Christendom. And so that's John Wycliffe. I looked it up, the Wycliffe Bible. I really just kind of launched into it here today. I felt like I just sat down and started talking, which I did. So if anybody wants to stop me now and say something, you're welcome. If you just walked into this class like Lloyd just did, you're going, what on earth is going on around here?
You should give them your.
Oh, here. Yeah. This is that diagram, this is that timeline.
Thank you.
Yeah. You can use that or not. It is available for use or to be thrown away. Your choice. Some people like to write on it, and because I'm just talking, it's not a class, but I just kind of talk. And if anybody has anything to say, they just interrupt me and say what they want. Yeah. So you're trying to read this, aren't you?
Yes.
This is 13. When did Wycliffe 13
Wycliffe was in 1300s, up in the 1400s.
so this would be Wycliffe Bible was 1382. Is that what it said? You already saw it? All right, so there you are. note the timeline. Know what we just came out of. Is that a coincidence? The Great Plague, the Black Plague, was 1346, 13 to 1351 with after effects of plague outbreaks. But shortly thereafter, along comes there's some kind of fracturing or fragmentation of authority, and this is me reading between the lines, that unleashes these uncontrollable forces at the decentralization of thought that will ultimately culminate in the Enlightenment. And then the American, from our perspective, the 1700s in the United States. And off we go. And then it'll kind of go sideways. Some people think that's sideways, but it'll really, from our perspective, in the 21st century, it'll go sideways again. But anyway, so yeah, the plague happens 1346 to 1351. We saw that outbreak. And then there's these forces that get unleashed. And one of them is Wycliffe, who translates the Bible from Latin, the Latin Vulgate, into English. And this is what it sounded like, read like. I mean, if you had to read this, that's how much the English language has changed. He was an Englander, right? So this is 14th century English.
I'm trying to figure out what club it is.
Called?
Oh,
Yeah. Pope.
Into the gospel from which he made and by to forward by his prophets and holy scriptures of his son, which is made to him of the seed of David by the flesh. And he was before ordained the Son of God in virtue by the Spirit. Can't get that word.
Have you read this before? Oh, okay.
good.
But if you didn't have English, if you didn't know English,
Yeah.
or how would you? There's no way to do it. I almost said if you didn't know English and you had to read this in English, but that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, yeah, look at these words too. Yeah, every word you realize when you look at something like this, how much of reading is you're not we think the big difference, and it is the big difference between English and Chinese, for example, is Chinese is a symbolic language. So it's got a symbol that represents a thought or something, and they construct the symbol, and we don't think of them as words. But de facto, that's what happens with a language. The words become symbols. You don't really you're not reading the letters to get the word. You just see the beginning. That's why these functions that help you in text with words that you're typing, it's a sounds like function. And a lot of times all it needs is, you can totally mess up everything, but it sounds like this English word. And so it gets it right. But really all you need is the first letter and the last letter. And a lot of times they've done experiments with this where they give you take just the first and last letter of a word and replace stuff in the middle, and you can still read it because the words become symbols. And now this breaks your pattern of reading symbols, and you have to actually read the letters and then interpret back to the symbol, which is like obey. Because you're wanting to pronounce that out. But yeah, all the way, what?
that's Romans 1.
Yeah, that's Romans 1, yeah.
Well, actually, until Webster, there was no consistent spelling of anything. That's why Webster made the Webster Dictionary.
Well, it's gonna change again. We're gonna look at Tyndale in a little bit, who was the next guy up. So this guy paid the price. We'll read the story on Wycliffe.
If I remember right about Wycliffe, in relationship to the plague and all that, he was ministering to people who were in despair because their children were dying from plague before they had a chance to be baptized into the Catholic Church, and according to the Catholic Church, that means they're bound to hell. And he was trying to fight against that.
Right.
And of course, the real issue for him was that people did not have the Bible in their own language, so they couldn't understand it.
Right.
So that, in my mind, part of why they call it the Dark Ages is because the church held them in the dark by not
Right.
giving them the Bible in their own language.
So yeah, you can see here with the Renaissance, you can see a sort of an implicit genesis of individuality. When you start talking about individuals talking to individuals rather than the church handing it down hierarchically, you're seeing some kind of birth of individualism. And so an individual wants to put the Bible into the hands of an individual. And so they've transcended that, not just that congregational approach, but sort of the mass approach. Mass as in mass congregation, not mass.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just coincidental. It means two different things. But now you see this individualistic approach to Christianity, to the gospel, where a person can consume the teachings of the Bible without a mediator. It's an unmediated revelation of God's word. And that was humongous for the church. And they'll take it to the next level in just a little while, 100 and some odd years, when Luther arrives on the scene. And another thing that's going to cause that, of course, is the invention of the printing press, Gutenberg, later in the century, in the 1400s. But anyway, I thought you would just get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
I do look at the word thanks there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, wow.
But I
Yeah,
like
it's
the
incredible.
way that Jesus, the J is actually Stein, Greek.
It's much closer to the Greek,
Right.
Jesus in Greek. So take off the sigma at the end, and that's what they got here. Anyway, that's very few of the words are left alone, or left the way they are, right? Left the way the office is one of apostle. Was one.
Oh, God.
Okay, so that's Wycliffe. That's all I want to say about him, because I don't know a lot more. If any of this,
They burned his bones posthumous.
yep, I think I threw him in a river or something like that.
Something.
Took his
And
ashes.
He died in prison, and after Jan Hus was burned at the stake, then they declared Wycliffe a heretic. Did something
Yeah.
with bones.
Yep. So that's Wycliffe, and that's going to start it. He is often called the morning star of the Reformation. A lot of people would say this is when the Reformation began. Reformation from the vantage point of people like us, not the people who are. Remember the thing of the word Protestant. What are the first 7 letters of the word Protestant? So depends on which side of that line you fall. And then they're going to be a counter-reformationist too, which we probably won't talk about much, but that'll be the Council of Trent and so forth. Jesuits, etc. So that's the period of the Renaissance right here, this first blue section. And I don't, you're going to see art. We talked about the art. I meant to pull it back up. You've got these great works of art that suddenly appear on the scene. Michelangelo's David, the Sistine Chapel, Da Vinci's Last Supper. These religious works of art that endure through the centuries. That's all Renaissance. Okay, I don't know that I want to say anything more about the Renaissance. Let me catch you up on something. We're going to build this little diagram, this little, I don't know which one, schema here. So this is the pre-modern era. We've talked about all of these things. Some of those words are really small. Let me see if I can make this big here for a second. Yeah, you don't notice that when you're doing it, but when you're making it. What am I looking for? Slideshow, thank you. So those of you in the feed, all it did would make it worse probably in the feed, but up in here, there's a video projector where it gets a lot bigger. So we talked about all of these things. This was the pre-modern era, which we often call medieval. It's a period of religious Christendom. It's Gregory, let's call it, from the 600s up to the Enlightenment, and it's a sliding scale depending on when you want to decide that the Enlightenment began, which is another self-flattering word, enlightenment. Enlightenment from the people who believe that it was enlightening. But anyway, we have God who is defined by the Nicene Creed. That's what I chose. And now the narrative, the story that people told themselves to explain their own origins and their relationship to the world around them will be defined by that, basically by that creed. It's a religious narrative of origins, of everything that is. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, and then so on and so forth. The Bible, unquestioned, authoritative, whoops, I forgot a word there, beyond criticism. Did this last night. Church and state are fused. I'm probably going to change church and state there to culture by the time we get to here, because even the idea of church and state and some kind of having to decide on some kind of relationship between church and state is a bit anachronistic. It's obsolete too. And really, it's just who gets control of the culture. And at that point, Christianity was in control of culture. And so now, who's in control of culture? Well, we're in a period of culture war, which is what we're going to, that's the whole point of talking about this. This got replaced with culture war, which is ongoing. And a lot of people thought the culture war was decided, and so did I, in 2020 or so. I saw 2020 as a victory dance by a certain side of the culture wars that won definitively. And it turns out they won all the battles. But now there's a counter-cultural war going on, counterculture going on. We're the counterculture. In the 60s, there was a counterculture. They were the counterculture, the people that won, in my view, in 2020s, in every realm, pretty much. Now it turns out there's a counterculture, but it ain't them. They're the establishment. They're the people they fought against starting in the 60s. They now, you know, there's people that control universities, public education, universities, government, entertainment, media, transnational organizations, and so forth. And so there was this counterculture and a complete and wholesale, basically, takeover of those institutions and centers of, you know, propagation of culture, and urban centers also, like San Francisco and New York. And now there's a counterculture. Well, the great inversion, right? The counterculture is, in a sense, the people they overthrew. And so now they have to deal with it and, you know, suck it up. You brought it on yourself, so here we are. Anyway, morality, objective, external, universal. Of course, that's how we think of morality, right? That's not the way that many people think of it today. Science was known as natural theology, which is the study of God's creation. The prevailing narrative was religious, which we talked about. Personal identity was defined by God himself. We are all created in the image of God. That's the case. Original sin, Augustinian, Adam's sin is handed down genetically, so on and so forth. And that's going to be the prevailing narrative for 1,000 years. And that's all now going to change shortly. So we'll build that up as we go along. All right, what do we got here? Protestant Reformation. Anybody want to say anything about the Renaissance? All of these eras are interesting. It just depends on which one you want to spend time in.
So the word means rebirth. What do we mean a rebirth of what?
Culture, a wholesale rejuvenation, renewal, cultural renewal.
So like the arts.
All of it, everything, philosophy, all of it, yeah. To the detriment of church authority, because it's going to be a period much like today of massive decentralization, and that decentralizing. When decentralization happens, when fragmentation starts, when the fragmentation of authority starts to happen and starts to unravel, it unleashes forces in all different directions. You don't have any idea how it's going to manifest itself. And we're in another one of those periods now. And it's like I said before, in 2020 in the summer, when all of that mayhem was going on, I said out loud, probably in this Sunday school class and other places, we're at the end of one thing and the beginning of another, but I'm not sure what we're at the end of, nor what we're at the beginning of. And I'm still not sure. Because it's still evolving and moving. It's hard to tell.
It's hard to name that until decades later. I mean,
Mhm.
it's one thing to look back in history and we can look back over an overview and see it in the big picture, but when you're living in it, you can't really see it.
Yep, and you see it with tremendous bias.
Yes.
And it's very hard to get above, which I do try to do in this class. I want to be able to, I would want somebody who doesn't agree with my worldview at all to be able to sit in this class and still go, okay, yeah, I get this, dude, that sounds good. Or no, I think that's wrong. But not, you're just spouting your own. I do that with the Bible. And I'm gonna do that in shortly when we get to the current era. I'm gonna make my opinions known about that. But right now, we just want to understand how we got here. And the negative side and the positive side of these events that were happening.
Having studied music history a lot, which you really start your music history studies around the Renaissance. You see how everything is heading in one direction, and how all the arts, whether it be music, it be visual art, or it be even literature, they're all influenced by the culture.
Yes,
And so, for years we had, our culture was solidified behind the mores of God, right? Western culture. But beginning in the 1800s, they're starting to destroy that. And you start to see that in music. In music, they try to get away from tonality. They were trying to destroy tonality with, like, say, the 12-tone music, and all that stuff, and get away from tonality. And just because, and you see that reflected in philosophy, because there is no rhyme or reason. Everything is just all by chance.
yeah, when we get to the 1800s, something's gonna mutate. And one of the things that's gonna happen is the Bible is not yet an object of criticism. On the contrary, it's get it into the hands of people. But in the 1800s, the Bible, like any realm of science, it's biblical studies. But by study, they don't mean, excuse me, let's choose a different word. Scientific criticism. So you have these sciences, and they take a critical eye, scientific investigation, which we'll talk about in the Enlightenment. Rene Descartes, and we're just going to mention their names and their basic contribution. Francis Bacon and these guys that defined what science is. And if you define science a certain way now, and then you say we want to take a scientific eye to the world around us, one of the things you take a scientific eye to and a critical eye to is the Bible. Which means if you're going to do that, you don't assume it's true. You're gonna critique it. Well, that really had never happened. I mean, Luther threw out books. James is the epistle of straw. I don't like Revelation. That sort of thing, but not, I'm going to deconstruct the Bible. Like a car, I'm going to take it apart piece by piece, study the parts, and then put it back together, which is what they did. And of course, depending on who you are, you rip the Bible apart into different parts, but it's your own biases that decide how you rip it apart and how you put it back together again, which we'll talk about as well. And people like Wellhausen and the documentary hypothesis for the Pentateuch and so forth. I'll hit it, but I won't talk about it at length because this is not a history class. Anyway, now we're into the Reformation. Now the Renaissance is going to slide into, it's going to unleash forces. And one of the things that happens in the middle of this is the invention of a person named Gutenberg, who will make the first printing press. And of course, the first book off the printing press was known as the Gutenberg Bible. So now not only do you have a Bible in English because of Wycliffe, you can mass produce it now for the first time. Because even though you have a Bible in English, how do you get it into the hands of people? And the only way you can do that is the way that you did it for thousands of years. or for 1,000 years, excuse me. You copy it by hand. Well, now the printing presses roll and off we go. So that's transformative. And so we move from an era of oral tradition and written manuscripts, oral tradition back in the time of Jesus, and then into written manuscripts. If you ask, where did the first books of the Bible come from? The answer is from the oral traditions that were handed down by the apostles. I hand down to you, Paul says, what I received. That, 1 Corinthians. On the night Jesus was betrayed, what's he doing? He's reciting an oral tradition. And then what'll happen is what he wrote, when he wrote it down, that'll begin to be copied. And it becomes a written tradition by hand for 1,000 years. It gets preserved. Along comes Gutenberg. Now we're just going to run it off the printing press. And we move from a world of oral tradition, oral hand-me-down, and manuscript copying to a world of print, which will not only change it will not only change the access of we're moving closer and closer to an information age. It'll change the very way that people think, because the written word now is everywhere, or is going to be everywhere. So literacy, all those things are affected. So when there was not a printing press, you went to mass and you heard in Latin. Your only option was to hear in Latin the word of God, whatever the church happened to give you. Well, now you have a written Bible in English. Gutenberg, was that English? Well, I don't even know. Was that German? I don't even know. I mean, that's my history, right? German? Yeah, all right. So for German. But now it's a mass-produced Bible. And there's more decentralization of authority and control. Decentralized authority means decentralized control. And when there's decentralized control, that's going to make some people unhappy. Because control, I sound like a 1960s liberal now. Activist. Control is power, all those, knowledge is power, all those things. You're putting that in the hands of the individual. It's funny how the counterculture works. It's I'm now that guy, right? No, you're the establishment. I'm the counterculture guy, right? It's really weird. But anyway, so Gutenberg, the printing press, transformative, revolutionary, and then shortly after that comes a man who unwittingly unleashed forces that even he didn't want to unleash, and his name, of course, was Martin Luther, who was a professor and an Augustinian monk, professor at the University of Wittenberg. And he didn't like some things that the Catholic Church was doing. I forgot to pull it. Did I save it? Yeah, here they are. And this is what he didn't like. You're going to see some themes here. These are Luther's 97 Theses. This is his disagreement with the church. It was supposed to be a scholarly disagreement. He wasn't trying to launch a movement or a revolution or any of that. It was a professor and a writer, and he wants to have a debate. And so let's just take a look at a few of them here. Let's see. The 97 Theses. Yeah, let's see how big we can make this. That's big enough. All right. He's widely regarded as one of the greatest writers, German writers ever in history. This was probably in Latin. That was the scholarly language. Let's see. What's that?
I would assume it was Latin.
Notice, first of all, we don't get past the first two when you're going to see the mention of Augustine and Pelagius. And we talked about those two guys. Augustine, 4th, 5th century, had an argument with a guy named Pelagius over the question of human ability and the access of God's grace, the accessibility to God's grace. Augustine said total inability, no access, no ability whatsoever. You are entirely at the mercy of God in accessing his grace. Pelagius said total ability. No, Augustine said you are infected by Adam, the guilt of Adam's sin and the effect is genetically transferred. It was a contagion, which is the word that I used to describe it when we were studying Genesis. And you can see from Genesis chapter 3 to Genesis chapter 6, the contagion of sin spread wherever humans go, like a cancer that they carry within them, more like the Black Plague. Like it's airborne or something. I don't know. Anybody you come into contact, it just, only in this case, it's offspring. But so that's Augustine. Total inability. You are infected by the guilt of Adam and the effects of Adam's sin. Pelagius said, no, you're not. Man's nature today is not affected by Adam's sin. So Augustine, original sin. You have the guilt of original sin and the effect. Pelagius said, no, you do not. John Cassian in the middle, you're both right and you're both wrong. It's a cooperation. God reaches out and man has the ability to reach up and take it. So it's this cooperationist. It's kind of like it takes two sides. That was the Cassian position. And so, what's that?
I was gonna say, it's the strongly held position today.
And that is the semi-Pelagian position. And so Luther is going to accuse the church of being semi-Pelagian. And he's going to say, I'm the Augustinian. You people claim you're Augustinian. You're not Augustinian. You're semi-Pelagian. I'm the Augustinian monk. And I am resolutely and consistently Augustinian, which he is in his book. And so on the first two theses, you get Augustine and you get Pelagius. So he takes the central issue right off the bat. This is a debate fundamentally about human ability, which will eventually reach an argument between the followers of John Calvin and the followers of a man named Jacobus Arminius, I think is how you say his name. And you're going to get the Calvinists versus the Arminians, predestination, election versus free will. And then we're going to formalize, the followers of Calvin are going to formalize a doctrine of total depravity, which is going to be Augustinian. And Arminius is going to formalize something that he would call Augustinian probably, but then sneak something in there to
What do they call themselves? The
remonstrance. Yeah, the five remonstrance. Go ahead.
Interestingly enough, both groups, the guys that developed the TULIP, the Council of
Tulip is the
Lords,
5 points of
you
Calvin.
know, and the remonstrance, they both supported the doctrine of total depravity.
Yeah,
Which you won't find half the Baptists today deny the doctrine of total depravity because they don't understand.
they don't do it. They don't do it on purpose. They don't do it consciously.
Right.
If you get further down the list, you go, wait a minute, this one here, the way you're formulating security has the doctrine, there's a conflict with total depravity. But it's not something that, it's not conscious. It's just like, I noticed down here, but anyway, this is not a theology thing. We can debate all these issues about theology and so forth.
But I'm just saying, I've had conversations with many pastors who should know better. Who believe that the doctrine of total depravity, Calvin taught that everybody's as depraved as Hitler. But that's not what he taught.
No, and he was not the originator of the 5 points.
No,
And it-
5 points came in 1619.
And in response to the remonstrance.
In response to
Yeah,
remonstrance.
But
total depravity just means that every part of our being has been affected by
Yeah.
the fall.
I'm going to back away now
Okay, sorry.
from theology. I can talk about it, but it's incendiary and it's beyond
Yeah.
it's not necessary for our discussion here. I just want to point out the preeminence of Augustine versus Pelagius. This is 1520. So we're now 1400 to 1520. We're 1100 years after Augustine versus Pelagius, and we're back to Augustine versus Pelagius. So, only he's not going to accuse them of being Pelagian. He's going to accuse them of being semi-Pelagian. Yeah.
When was that?
1530s. He's right after.
Right after Luther concur with Luther. He died in 1560, I think.
Yeah, he wasn't very old.
64.
He wrote a commentary on every book of the Bible. You can look all this up on the internet. Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he.
But you can look all this up on the internet and tell me when I'm wrong, because I mean, a lot of this stuff I haven't studied for a long time. Which probably means I shouldn't be talking about it, but I am anyway. Anyway, let's see. So you can see in number 4 there, it is therefore true that man being a bad tree can only will and do evil. Augustinian.
Yep.
That's the point. He's going to accuse the Catholic Church of abandoning Augustine. That's what he's going to do. And a bunch of other corruptions as well. Let's see what else we got here. It's false to state that man's inclination is free to choose between either of two opposites. So obviously this is a man who does not believe in libertarian freedom. Neither do I. There's a foreshadowing. The inclination is not free, but captive. So he will write a book. It is often considered his magnum opus. Magnum opus, did I say that right? Magnus opum? I forget how to say that. His manifesto that's going to be called On the Bondage of the Will. And it will be in response to a book written by a man named Erasmus, also one of the greatest personalities of the Reformation, unwittingly, which we'll talk about. But he wrote a book called On the Freedom of the Will. He was goaded into doing it by his own side. He was Catholic. He was goaded into doing it to respond to the Protestants. He was way above his head because he was not a theologian. He was a Greek scholar, bless his heart. He was the first one to compile in a Greek New Testament from the Greek, a Greek New Testament, Textus Receptus, from Greek manuscripts against the authority of the church. He did all that, but he wrote that book. And Luther took 9 months to respond. And the reason he took 9 months is not because he was busy and not because he wasn't sure how to do it, but because he was going to use it as the opportunity to make his manifesto of Augustinianism. That's how I view On the Bondage of the Will. It's a manifesto of Augustinianism. Original sin and total inability. Let's see.
This talks about the Supreme Court.
It's false to state that the will can by nature conform to correct precept. Yeah, Supreme Court of the United States.
Sorry.
As a matter of fact, without the grace of God, the will produces an act that is perverse and evil, very straightforward. So it goes on and on. If you read through this, you'll see how good his writing is, even in English. His ability to coin a phrase. What do you call that? A turn of the phrase. I forget the expression, is remarkable. And I highly recommend On the Bondage of the Will. It is, I believe, still not refuted in the 21st century by people who disagree with it, even within evangelicalism, who would be Arminians, some of whom I've talked to about this. That's just my opinion. Oh, by the way, regarding the effects of the Black Plague, there are these, I went to Ireland in 2020 and just before COVID in January, and we drove from Dublin down to Cork, which is literally north to south and back. And there are these little towers, they're called house towers, tower houses. And most of them are broke at the top, but they're these, they look like castle ramparts. What do you call those things at the top? Little towers at the top of castles. They're like this, like they're on the ground. And I went, man, look at all these. They're all over the place. They look generally like this one here on the left side. And people lived in them. They're called tower houses. And so what happened was, I think, there was an awful lot of banditry going on after the plague, right? And so they resorted to this. But you'll see these things dotting the landscape everywhere if you drive in Ireland. And here's a map of them.
Yeah.
So we drove, down here is Cork, all the way at the bottom. So we drove all the way up to Dublin, and just passing these things all the time, and castles. But the house towers, as an after effect of, they started building them in the 14th century. There it is, 14th to 16th centuries. And the plague was 1346 to 1350, the first one, 1346 to 1351. Irish towers. All over they leave them. They're archaeological, I mean, they really value that, but they're all over the place. On the side of the road, you'll see them up on the hills. Okay, so that's, I'm not gonna say a lot more about Luther because we want to move. What else do I want to say? Oh, Luther also did what Wycliffe did. In fact, it might have been Luther. Did Luther coin the term Morning Star of the Reformation?
No, I think that was Huss.
Well, Huss was contemporary, so he wouldn't have known Reformation.
Well, Huss said something that kind of pointed towards Luther. Maybe it was Luther, I don't know, I try to remember the phrase, I think Huss, means goose or something like that, and he referred to it, that 100 years from now, there's gonna be
Oh, really?
a swan that comes and people look at that being, Luther.
All right, so Luther started the fight. He was a German. And he believed in the Germans. He was not trying to overthrow the German church. He was not trying to overthrow the church in Germany. He just wanted, he had a problem with Rome. But he wanted a church for the Germans. But this idea of individualism, no, that's not yet, except for the Anabaptists, that's not yet. And so if you wanted to break away from the German church, he would have had a real problem with that. As in also an act of rebellion. He wanted a church for the Germans, top down, authoritative, which is why we have the Lutheran church is a top down kind of church, like the Catholic church, like the Roman church is hierarchical. That's right. But he also translated the Bible into German, like Wycliffe did, to English. And so these forces, you can see these forces are just unleashing now, and it's breaking out. And so at the same time that the German Reformation, after the fact, it's known as Reformation. Before the fact, it's just Luther and the other guy. Who's the other German? His buddy. I forget the guy's name.
Melanchthon?
Yeah, that guy, Melanchthon. Yeah.
Philip?
They're just doing their thing. They're scholars doing their thing. At the same time, though, a parallel movement will break out in England and in Switzerland. And the English Reformation, as it will come to be called, the biggest name that will come out of that will be William Tyndale. And he will fight with the English church, Anglican church, which also is on its way breaking away from Rome. And then there's going to be the Swiss situation. Calvin, who is French, wants to go to Switzerland and plant churches. So he goes to Switzerland, compelled to do so by, I think it was Zwingli, who was the Swiss guy, the Swiss reformer. If you don't do this, God is going to curse you. There's famous. So he went. And then the Anabaptist movement is going to pop up. That's when you're going to see the individualized Christianity, the local church individualized Christianity begin to pop up that we now experience today with the Anabaptists. And so we'll pick up, we got to stop now, but we'll pick up with the Anabaptists and Calvin, talk a little bit more about the Reformation, and then leave it behind a little bit about the Enlightenment, which is unleashed from the Reformation, because it's continuing unraveling of church authority. It's just unraveling. And there's nothing they can do about it, even though they're going to try with the Counter-Reformation and the Council of Trent, the Jesuits and so forth. But that's where it's going, and then it's going to take a severe secular turn. It's still religious, but it's going to take a severe secular turn, the culture is, in the 1800s. Politically, the culture is going to remain what it is, but that's going to begin to unravel by the time you get to the 20th century, particularly after World War I. So let's go ahead and stop there and pick it up the next time. I have no idea whether what I just said made any sense. It's a blur. I was just talking through a timeline. So if it's confusing, let me know and I'll try to straighten something out. It's mostly a dialogue between me and Phil.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was doing most of the talking. All right, I'll talk to you all later.
Thanks, Gary.
See ya.
Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome. See you, Gabe.